Hi, everybody. Welcome to IDPS 2022's special recorded talk on setting up an effective global data protection program. I'm Vasanthika Srinath, a lawyer by profession and a fellow of information privacy at IAPP and the global DPO at Concentrix Corporation. I'm joined here by Reena Bengeri, who is a global privacy operations lead at ITC Infotech. She is PCB certified DPO, and both of us are also certified DPOs with FDPPI. Over the next 30 minutes or so, we will explore some of the key or most important factors that we need to have in place and need to consider to have an efficient, effective, global cross-border and cross-functional data protection program. So if you're a DPO or been tasked with setting up a global data protection program, the first step before you roll up your sleeves and get to business is to take a step back and think. The entire program can sometimes feel a little overwhelming. So therefore, the first thing you need to do is to identify your key privacy drivers. What do you want to achieve and why? So some of your key drivers could be meeting data protection compliance requirements. That is the most important thing. You could also be focused on trying to avoid sanctions and penalties if you're operating in a very sensitive business area. You may have to meet requirements of business partners or board members if you have a mandate from board. Sometimes it might also be very important to have a good program in place to establish a competitive differentiator. Or you may also want to just use it as a way to maintain and gain your customer employee trust and ensure that it helps ultimately in your brand building. So those who are responsible for building a privacy program must be able to clearly articulate the drivers in order to be successful to obtain executive buy-in. So once you have identified your drivers, the next step would be to establish a privacy strategy. So what does it take? What do we want to do? Who are your stakeholders? What is the impact or involvement that you expect from each of your stakeholders? And where do you see the organization as your baseline and where you would like to go? So you need to have all of that mapped out, based on which you can articulate your requirement and strategy and go and take your executive buy-in and sponsorship. It's not going to be cheap, right? You're going to need people, you're going to need tools, you're going to need time and effort from various people, and there's going to be a lot of hard work. So unless you have a top management buy-in and sponsorship, the program is not going to really take off and be successful. So once you have a clear executive buy-in is when you will start working with all your stakeholders and start documenting various data. You're creating your policies, creating your processes, and so on. So once you have identified your key stakeholders, rather than I would rather go to Reena to then ask her, how do you identify your key stakeholders?
Yeah, so thank you, Vasantika. See, one of the key things which we need to do is, as you said, we need to have a management buy-in in running the program of privacy. So now when you look at key stakeholders in the organization, we need to look at from a privacy standpoint where, as an organization, employee data is where we are talking about privacy is impacting, right? So when you talk of employee data, the first thing which comes to mind is the process where we are collecting that data. And the gateway to collect that data would be our recruitment team and the HR team, right? So these are the two key stakeholders where we need to bring them up to speed in terms of orienting them in what is privacy, and in the context of employees, what aspects of employee data come under the privacy fold, right? That is one part. Second part, because we have these HR departments and the recruitment function engage with external stakeholders like vendors who actually will be providing for an example would be employee potential employment candidate profiles, right? When the candidate profile comes to us, what is it in that which needs to be brought under the privacy umbrella, right? So we have HR, recruitment, and the corresponding vendors who come under the privacy domain. These will be the stakeholders at the beginning when we talk about collection of data. Now, going from there, further stakeholders would be other departments who are using the employee data to process to deliver an outcome. For example, you have the employee data going into finance department where they would be engaging with looking at the data, looking at the expenses which the employee would have submitted claims for. In some cases, we would also see that finance department also engages with external third parties to deliver the benefits to the employees, like HR does in terms of the benefits administration spans across HR and finance department broadly, because you have, say for example, payroll processing is outsourced, or even if you look at insurance benefits which we deliver to the employees, that would also be coming under third party management in most cases. So these three departments are the key stakeholders in a privacy program. Yeah, Vasantika, you want
How
to?
about information security? For us,
Yes,
IT and InfoSec is also a very, very key ally
that
because
is
we depend on them. One, to help with things perhaps like ISO 27 or
yes.
any other requirements. So,
Correct. So as you're saying, yeah, IT department becomes a more internal stakeholder, because if you look at the privacy aspects, and we talk, this is very key in terms of how are we building secure measures to protect the employees' data when we are collecting. When, as I said, HR, recruitment are the key gateways for getting the employee data, which has privacy into it. The key aspect to consider during privacy program implementation would be implementation of the relevant secure measures of processing the personal data of the employees.
correct.
So if you look at the IT function, who are actually enablers of security in the organization, that could include, ensuring that the assets which are given to the employees have relevant security measures, like USB should be disabled, or there could be email security which is implemented. That is one part. So there is a IT organization. Then there is a security assurance group, typically in organizations, where that assurance group will be the checker kind of role, where they ensure that the security measures which are implemented by the IT organization is working effectively. So these two will be there. Sometimes you would also have internal kind of a operations department, where all the employees data comes into the operations department, where for example, your work allocation. When you are in an IT services organization, the employees keep getting allocated to different projects based on the requirements, and this employee data can move between regions of the company, right? So the moment we talk about the operations team who's managing the employee data, this is one key stakeholder who also comes under the purview of privacy.
Yeah. So, and in order to be able to achieve or identify the required technology measures and security measures, I guess first we also need to conduct a complete privacy impact assessment. So we
Yes.
need to establish, first identify various pieces of artifacts of personal information and data that is processed, and identify their complete life cycle where you store it. So
Yeah.
how do you go about creating a privacy impact assessment program? Because that is something that is also very huge and a very daunting task.
Yes. Yes. So if you look at privacy impact assessment, so that is a key activity in a privacy program, where we identify key aspects of the data elements which are part of the data collection process. After data collection, you do data processing. So what kind of processing you are doing, whether there is a creation of a data derived data element from this privacy data set. Then you identify records of processing, what are the individual data elements, how they are stored, how they are processed, and you make sure that the secure measures are implemented on all these phases, right? So data at rest, data in use, and data at security. So all of these secure measures are important during the DPIA process. That is one. Second, we also identify what are the retention requirements of this data, right? So based on the applicable laws, what is applicable from the law perspective, and what is the retention requirement, that is a key aspect here. Then we also identify if this data is being shared with external stakeholders, as I said, the vendors which we are engaging to deliver services. How does that data flow happen? So a complete data flow diagram along with the repository of data elements is important, and that is the part of the DPIA.
Yeah. So the very, very important next step, once we have identified where the data flows, especially outside the organization, would be to have your data protection agreement with the third-party vendors.
Yes.
So once we have identified how they're going to operate it, we have to also verify that they will use it in the way it was intended, and it is stored and secured in that manner and destroyed. And we have to be able to have the ability to audit them, check them,
correct,
on a need basis. So, and necessarily they have to support us in the event of any audit on us.
Yeah, these are all aspects of a typical data protection agreement with the vendors.
Yeah.
And then it flows from I would say the customer agreements. If we are in a business where we are servicing our customers, what are the obligations we have signed up for in a customer agreement? If we are engaging a vendor, we need to make sure that we are passing on those obligations directly to the vendor who's being engaged for delivering services.
Yeah, absolutely. So the very, very key element in that is for the legal team to ensure that the flow downs are very, very appropriately marked out and, are documented correctly. Because you miss even one flow down, you will be sandwiched in between with an obligation which you don't have a corresponding, enforceable right for. Correct. So that is a very key part of that.
It has to be back to back, basically.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So once we get to this, then this is this will start getting granular.
Yes.
So how do we then go up again and start establishing goals? Because we will have to ensure that there is something we have to review to see where we stand.
Yes.
So on a regular basis, or check whether all vendors are covered, or how do we go back, audit them? So how do we create goals and targets for the privacy team?
Okay, so since we have now come top down, we know where our privacy aspects in the organizations lie, right? So we collate and assimilate all that information, including the stakeholders internally who are responsible as part of the privacy program. So we identify what are the key drivers within those departments where they need to ensure compliance. So basically you can say that derive a statutory compliance checklist, if we have to call it, where we say because the HR department is engaged in so and so regions, and there are local laws applicable there, aligning with the applicable laws in that region, create a statutory compliance checklist which will articulate clause by clause the expectation on compliance, where it will also cover aspects of data collection, whether you have given privacy notices, whether you have a organization policy like a data privacy policy, whether you have vendor contracts where you are passing on the obligations of privacy there, whether you have privacy notices for the candidates as applicable in the law. Typically, GDPR also, if you have to say, will expect that you issue the notice prior to data collection. And that is an important aspect when you actually measure the success of the program, right? So it's an important compliance point. So these are the points which you also have to consider while you are setting up the goals for the departments, where you say, okay, as a department, you need to make sure that so and so KPIs are identified and you're complying to. And when you set up this, there has to be a periodic measurement. So the measurement always rolls up to the top management, where the DPO office would report the metrics by departments, and to the periodically to the management committee. Internally also, you can do audit uh, on a the identified frequency, like quarterly or whatever, where you actually go to the department, look at what is the compliance process which they need to follow, and whether there is compliance to those processes. For example, if you look at the access control, when you have as a department the employees personal data in, for example, your HR files, right? So in where is this HR files of employees stored, whether there is relevant access control there, whether there is what are the organization security measures which have been implemented in that department to ensure security of the data which is sitting of the employees. So these are all the aspects which will come under the compliance check as part of the goal setting, and which will roll up to the organization goal for privacy.
Yeah, thank you. That's very interesting. So when we have all of this, I think another very, very important measure of success of the fact that we have taken everybody with us, because obviously compliance is not just one person's business. It is, a corporate and a collective effort and collective responsibility. Is how well and how successfully we are able to implement privacy by design. So at every step, for introduction of every new process or new tool, are we actually considering privacy as one of the basic requirements, or does it come to us after IT and various departments have done their choices, and then they say that this is what we want, and then we say, hey, but now I have this privacy problem? Or are we part of that initial check? So how do we go about creating that privacy by design as an organizational, as a part of the organization's DNA?
Yeah, very critical point, and I think a lot of organizations struggle with this to demonstrate that they have done this, right? So typically what happens, if you see, is there has to be a two-pronged approach, in my opinion. One is that you build a culture in the organization that employees are privacy savvy, right? And there are various ways of doing it, right? You do awareness mailers, you do training programs, you do assessments, and so on. That is one part. Second part is, as responsibility of a DPO office, it is important to get engaged with every nook and corner of the organization where there will be an impact on privacy. Okay. For example, the easy catch would be the internal IT team, right? Which will include, the application support group, or you have the enablers of IT, where they engage. These days, all organizations are going ahead in the cybersecurity roadmap, where they're developing zero trust tools and implementing vendor solutions, ready-made packages, and so on and so forth, right? So in these two approaches, where you say it is a ready-made solution and you need to plug it in, and the other is where you are developing in-house applications based on the custom needs of the organization, right? In both of these scenarios, we need to make sure that we are connected by the DPO office to the root of this teams, right? Where we have this is all a journey, I would say, right?
Yes.
Even though you put processes, you put frameworks in place to ensure that privacy by design is included in your day-to-day operations. Lot of times, if these teams are working in silos, they would just look at which vendor is best, evaluate, and get that vendor to deliver the solution in a typical IT scenario.
But, and then we start the contracts and discover
exactly, that without any consideration of privacy, right? So typically the best practice and the way I have seen in my experience is that the DPO office has a very key role to play here to ensure that we are able to demonstrate privacy by design. We have to have a very good rapport built within the organization where we are connected to the procurement team. For example, if you're buying a solution off the shelf and which is very relevant for your IT business, right? It is important to get that vendor evaluated in terms of how their solution is meeting the requirements of privacy by design, right? That is important. Second, in the internal application support group, which you have various applications spinning off, or you have various upgrades of existing software which is happening. A lot of these vendors, for example, I can say in the ERP systems, there are already modules rolled out by the vendors which have privacy inbuilt as a solution. So the privacy by design concept is there in the market. Even the ready-made vendor solutions have actually aligned over the last 3-4 years. However, the responsibility of the DPO office is to ensure to be able to demonstrate this, and that demonstration will happen through, one is evaluation before you actually onboard a solution in the aspects of privacy, what kind of processes they have implemented within their solution to ensure that privacy is embedded at the root level of the architecture of the design, right? That is where it comes from, privacy by design. What secure practices in your architecture of the solution have you embedded, which will be making sure that privacy by design can be demonstrated in that solution. And if you have an application which is being rolled out over the years, you can always say, we are not touching the architecture, but that's not the solution.
True.
We need to make sure that the evaluation, when you upgrade an application, is also considering the fact that whether you are having any impact on the employees privacy, employees data where privacy has to be impacted, right? So the the way to approach this solution would be to ensure that your framework on which you are developing the solution is knitted with privacy by design.
Correct. Which also means, in addition to having a good rapport with the procurements and other team, also it brings us to, laws like GDPR require us to keep having regular awareness emails and posters. So you also remind people that privacy by design is a very important thing. So anyone who is a stakeholder in obtaining a new tool is reminded ever so often that privacy matters, privacy is important. So they reach out to the privacy team when they're getting a new tool. So your training and awareness also plays a very important role in that. So do you all calendarize it? So we'd like to every once in a while have some emails reminding people about privacy.
Yeah, that awareness is an ongoing exercise, and it's very difficult to measure the the awareness. You can't do a dipstick survey and then determine something, right? It's a very challenging aspect, and this developing the privacy culture in an organization takes ages, I would say, because it needs to be part of the DNA of the employee. So if you just go and interview somebody and ask the definition of the expansion of GDPR, they might falter, but that is not the true test of it, right? The true test is how DPO office has been effectively functioning to ensure that the compliance has been always optimal.
True. Yeah. True. Absolutely. So, how do we deal? Another very big challenge is dealing with data subject requests.
Yes.
Especially, I remember immediately after GDPR, people were not so aware. So it was quite a peaceful 6 months.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Gradually, the awareness started building, and then we had a very, very huge number of data subject requests. It became like, it seemed more like fancy to make that because I have a right and I can exercise it. It's now gradually, I think, it's more mature and, not unreasonable, but in between there was a huge spurt in our experience. So how do you deal with, there are ongoing requirements and then there is a sudden data subject request. There could be an employee or some person who's been in the system for so long and their data sits in multiple locations in multiple systems. And, how do you go about dealing with such a request? So
Yeah. So it's always, I mean, it's a matter of how you give priority within your DPO office team. And it's important to get, a team assigned to ensuring that the DSRs which are being received are being responded on time, acknowledged on time. It's a lot when in the initial days when there was no automation, I would say. These days, I think if you look at OneTrust and a lot of these tools where they have proper workflow built in the tool, where the stakeholders within the organization can also respond to DSRs internally to the DPO team and so on, right? So it is important from the DPO office perspective to ensure that there is a dedicated focus given and a KPI set up for a given set of people who will only be responsible all the time to comply to the DSR requests. That is one part. Second part is, as soon as you receive a request, what are those actions you need to take? So definitely there has to be a internal process within the organization which calls out, based on applicable laws, how a data subject request needs to be handled. What are those aspects where you say that you need to notify the data subject first, you have to acknowledge, you have to first establish the genuinity of the request, then within that, what is the timeline within which you need to respond? Say for example, GDPR expects 30 days, right? So we need to make sure that the internal communication and the handling of the data subject request happens prior to that 30-day timeline. And then legal, definitely legal team has to be involved to ensure that we are doing the right response to the data subject based on the understanding which we have. Most of the cases I have seen is that the people are requesting for deletion of data, right? So, what is it in our organization's interest? What is our data retention schedule? How are we going to respond to such requests by the region? That should be internally clearly articulated. What is our data retention and disposal expectation within the organization? Is there a policy? Do you have a schedule? What does the schedule say? How many years you need to retain the data? What are the laws under which we are entitled to retain the data? What are the legal hold proceedings which we need to consider when you cannot delete the data for organization need, right? All of those aspects need to be considered, and we should definitely have a standard template which we use to respond to data subject rights and close the matter over there. So that's how we should be approaching. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So that, I think we pretty much covered the entire gamut of what all data privacy operations involve and entail. And I think
Data breach is one thing I think we should also talk about.
is one is the intercountry data transfer, and
Data transfer and the data breach and
yes, data breach.
incident response. Yeah.
Yes, incident responses.
Yeah.
So while I was saying that we've covered the operations piece,
Yes.
yes, the responding to breaches.
Yes.
So and especially where there is a breach, you're supposed to respond within 72 hours.
Correct.
And not just respond, you're supposed to notify if required within 72 hours.
Yes.
Some clients may even ask for shorter timelines.
Correct. Yeah.
So we have a crack team that's available on call at any time of the day or night to start investigations. So how do you all work on things like that? So that is always a big challenge. You need an investigator, you need information security, and then you need somebody from privacy and legal.
Yes.
And the business, depending on the function that's involved.
Definitely. So yeah, that's how core team is formed based on an incident, right? So what typically should happen is, as soon as an incident is reported either to the privacy office or to the IT team or to the business, they quickly are informing the DPO office. DPO office will take a responsibility there to ensure that the right stakeholders are gathered. Then there is a initial discussion which happens where the incident is described. Then as an after effect of that, the person involved in the breach or the incident is also interviewed, interrogated, all the facts are collected. Then again, in a small team, we get together to identify the root cause analysis, identify the actions which need to be taken. and then we again regroup and seek the final opinion of the DPO, or the legal input is taken, and then we identify. There's a typical guideline which is available in terms of how do you classify a breach, whether it's an incident or it's a data breach, right?
Correct.
It could be a security incident or it could be a data privacy breach incident. So the guidelines at the organization level need to be available. How do you derive the implication of that breach, whether there is a impact on larger data subjects, or is there an impact where customer is involved and then we need to communicate to the customer, right? And then at the end
Whether
of,
you need to communicate.
yes, need to
That
communicate.
establishing that is again
Very important.
There was this very interesting regulation or notification we came across in New Zealand, for example, was one of the determining factors in determining whether you have to notify the breach. If the data subject is from a very from a community or from a category which is very sensitive. So is already, so for example, a disabled person.
Yeah.
And if you notify that person of the breach, it could possibly cause the person much more tension, grief, or spoil the person's health. And the nature of the breach is such that it does not actually, is not going to cause them major harm.
Right.
Then you should not go and tell them. Because by telling them, you're going to create more trouble. So there was a very interesting, directive on that. But most other countries don't have these kind of things. But there are, so many things that you have to look at when we are determining whether we have to notify or not. Yes. Or maybe, and one is notifying the authority, one is notifying the data subject. So determining all of that.
Yes, yes.
So, and the potential that notification can also expose you to class action litigation.
Yes, yes, sure.
And audits.
Yeah.
So all of this is something are, part of things to be contemplated, considered, and then handled with care.
Yeah. And it's important to close the loop properly.
Yes.
From end to end, right? From the time you got to know about the incident to the time you are closing that incident, what are the actions you have taken? What are the preventive actions? What are the corrective actions? How did you prevent the breach? And how did you communicate? As an aftermath, do you have to do a awareness session to the smaller group of the people involved? How do you take care? Preventive is very important.
Preventive, debrief, and prevention.
Yes, yes.
So you have to necessarily take steps, demonstrate that you have taken steps to prevent recurrence, and also perhaps go back once in a while to do a dipstick to see that is working.
Yeah, correct.
So these are that's how we finally close the loop on that.
And it has to be transparently also reported to the management that these incidents are happening or whatever, and how are we actually doing preventive actions as an organization. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. So and the last piece would be the data transfer,
correct,
international data transfer. So needing to look at the regulations between one country to the other, and which country you can, and how do you actually transfer the data, which is actually a big challenge given the fact that we all work on, for example, Office 360.
Yeah.
Everything, our calendar, or not calendar, but our address book, our details, we put our photos on it. It's available everywhere.
Yes.
So how do we deal with some of these, Germany is one country that is so insular that we keep in many companies have to have a separate tenant for them.
Right.
Because we cannot have any data sitting outside.
Correct.
So I actually asked around and I found that many companies are having multiple tenants, just one for Germany and one for the rest of the world.
Yeah.
So these are some challenges which, are to be dealt with country by country. And the bigger challenge will come when you're trying to bring everything together as a cohesive piece.
Correct. So, and it's very sensitive also from an organization perspective, handling data transfer. It's a
Yes.
very important subject, and it has to be dealt with sensitively, and ensuring that there is local law compliance always in place.
Yes.
So it is important to work closely with the legal experts who will be able to advise us on what is the expectation of the law in regards to data transfer, uh, and ensuring that relevant, and the key, of course, revolves around uh, what are the security safeguards which are available, whether there's an adequacy decision on that country's, on the country, and how the security measures have been implemented, what is the maturity of the cybersecurity posture of the organization, whether there is a cybersecurity insurance certification which they have. These
Correct.
aspects are definitely considered prior to deciding whether data transfer needs to happen outside of that country when you are dealing with the data of our employees.
Yeah. True. True. So I think we've pretty much covered everything that the data privacy organization looks at and needs to be concerned for.
Mhm.
So I think so. There's been a very interesting conversation. Thank you so much, Reena. It was very insightful
Yeah.
and very engaging. And I hope our listeners also enjoy this and find it very useful. So
Yes.
thank
Thank
you all
you.
for tuning in.
Yeah. Thank you, Vasantika and WPPI. And my best wishes to the attendees of the IDPS 2022 this year.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye.